See Saraswati Bai, the first lady Bhagavatar, as she called herself. Saraswati Bai's life begins in a railway station, in the railway station junction of Gutti in Andhra Pradesh, spelt as Gooty, G-O-O-T-Y, and it is on the Kadapa Madras railway line. And in 1894 or 1895, she was born in 1892, as you can see, but in 1894 or 1895, it was part of what was known as the South Maratha Railway, Southern Maratha Railway, which would later become the Madras and Southern Maratha Railway, the M and SM, which culminated in Central Station, which we know in the city today. Her father, Ramarao, was the station master of Gutti Junction. And in 1894, he and his wife Rangamal, by then they had 3 sons and a daughter. The daughter was the youngest and her name was Saraswati, and she was perhaps 2 or 2.5 when the railway train came from nobody knows where, and it deposited a dying man on the railway platform. He had cholera, and he was as given up for good. And the legend is that the servants had probably fled because they didn't want to be with somebody who had cholera. So this man was just offloaded on the Gutti railway platform and, just let them do what they wanted with it. But the station master's wife, Rangamal, decided that this is not the way that you treat an ill person, even if he was terminally ill. So at great risk to the family, this man was brought home, he was treated, and he recovered. When he recovered, he revealed himself to be the richest man in Madras city, Muddavarapu Dera Venkateswamy Naidu, the Dubash of Parry and Company. Dubashes, I mentioned this yesterday in my talk on Lady Elizabeth Gwilym, they were the translators. But that was pre-1857 when Dubashes could survive by means of making money between people who did not know the language. But post the First War of Independence, all companies, British companies, they had Dubashes. And these were basically agents who organized marketing, who organized finance when needed, and they earned a percentage, legitimate percentage out of the trade transactions. So it was almost like a profit sharing arrangement. And the more efficient the Dubash, the more money he could make in a completely straightforward fashion. And Muddavarapu Venkateswamy Naidu, Dera in his name is actually a corruption of Dare House, which is where Parry and Company has been headquartered ever since we know. And so Muddavarapu Dera Venkateswamy Naidu, as I said, was the richest man in the city. He lived in a house of just 150 grounds in Mylapore, each ground 2,400 square feet. And like some Vishwarupa Darshanam at the end of the during the Kurukshetra war, this dying man resurrects himself and reveals himself to be. So Rangamal had struck lottery without even realizing it, but we must not forget that it had happened out of her sense of humanity, that she rendered humanitarian help to a man who was dying. The man survived and he was grateful. And he said, what the hell are you doing in this stupid Gutti? Even now Gutti is a very backward town. I have been there, the weather is awful, 24/7, 365 and a quarter days of the year. And he said, what are you doing in this backwater? Just come with me to Madras and I will take care of all of you. So Ramarao resigned his job as the station master, he and his wife and the 4 children, they all decide to go to Madras. And such being the orthodoxy of those times, the Brahmin Madhva family cannot live in a Naidu household, even though it had 150 grounds. So they were given a house in Triplicane's big street. Even now, Veeraraghava Mudali Street as it is called, it's the only street which is double the size of all the other streets in terms of width in Triplicane, and so it's known as Big Street. And the family, that is Venkateswamy Naidu, owned property over there. Even today, if you go to Triplicane, you will find there are 2 streets, Venkateswamy Naidu Street and Buchibabu Naidu Street, just next to each other. More on the second person in a short while. So Venkateswamy Naidu brings the family and settles them in Madras. Rama Rao becomes a kind of a assistant to Venkateswamy Naidu. Venkateswamy Naidu himself has only a daughter, and when he dies, he adopts his eldest grandson from his daughter as his son, and that is Buchibabu Naidu, the great-grandfather of Raja Kausalya Devi, who is here in the audience. I never thought that she was going to be coming today to this meeting. It gave me great extra pleasure to realize that she was going to be present over here. So Buchibabu Naidu, we recognize him today as the father of modern Indian cricket. He was the man who showed Indians that they could play the game as well as what the British could do. He fought for Indians to be allowed to play the game against the English. He also ensured that they were allowed inside the Madras Cricket Club to play. He spent his own money in creating a cricket team and so on and so forth. He was a very generous man who did much for Indian sport. And for a very long time, we had what was known as the Buchibabu Naidu Trophy, which was played, which sadly, this is the sense of history that we have today. This is all forgotten and nobody commemorates this great man. We have T20s, we have World Cups, we have all these sort of things, but we forget the man who really made it, who lit the spark, so to speak, among us as a community. Now, Buchibabu had sons and he had a daughter called Narasamma, and Narasamma had to be taught music. What do you do in those days? The music master would come home to teach music. And as I remember very well, even when we were growing up, when the music master would come home to teach music, you never let the girls of the family remain alone with the music master. Their grandmother, who had no sense of music, or grandmother who had terrific sense of music, would make her presence felt. She would come and sit practically between music master and student, and then the class would proceed. And us male children, we never knew, hey, what class, attend, go. And we'd be sent off and we'd hate it because some sister or some cousin will be learning. What were we going to be doing over there? The idea, we didn't know that we were guardians of the family honor, so to speak. But that is how we all learnt music, because we would go, we would hate it. Slowly we would get absorbed into it. Some of us would begin singing and so on and so forth. So when Narasamma had to be taught music, and it came from a Hindustani tutor, an ustad, she couldn't be left with him alone, so they decided that young Saraswati, who was just 5 or 6 at that time, the daughter of Rama Rao, she could also accompany Narasamma and start singing with her. That is how Saraswati's musical training really begins. She begins learning Hindustani music and she sings it very well. And such was Buchibabu's generosity and such was the family's generosity that they didn't mind that the poor dependent child was singing music far better than the daughter of the family. In fact, they encouraged it and they said, that's fine, let her sing, and so on and so forth. So at home, Saraswati would sing to her parents in Tiruvallikeni, and one day when she was singing, the family had gathered for some celebration, and we are looking at sometime in the early 1900s. And a Pandit who was walking on the road, his name was Pandit Krishna Shastri. He comes over and he says, I heard this girl sing and I would like to teach her Sanskrit. And so he just walks in, he becomes a part of the family. And Krishnachar, that's his name, and he begins to teach her Sanskrit. He also begins to teach her shlokas, how to recite them with impact. He begins telling her a lot of stories. He was a lecturer at the Madras Christian College. At that time, it was not in Tambaram, it was in Georgetown, where NSC Bose Road is today. That is where the school and the college used to be. He was a teacher of Sanskrit and he was a Pandit over there. He began to teach Saraswati all that he could, and she became a very quick learner, and she was soon reciting shlokas. She was singing the songs that he had taught her. Not only was she learning from him, he had a habit of bringing some of the best known musicians with whom he was very friendly. They would come home and they would listen to her, and she didn't know what, she was so young. She had no shyness basically because she had been exposed to these kind of visitors coming home all the time. So by the time she was 10 or so, some of the greatest names in the field of Carnatic music were visiting that house. Some of them were overwhelmed by what they heard, by the sweetness of her voice, that they would, bring expensive shawls and place it on her shoulder as tokens of appreciation for what they had heard. She didn't realize the importance of any of these things. The family was totally dependent on the Buchi Babu family, and so they were, you know, just above poverty level. They were taken care of. When she was 10, she was married off to Chakrapani Rao's son. I forget his name, the husband, Venkatramana Rao. And he came from Salem and he stayed on with the family thereafter. So there was one more mouth to be fed, that was basically the husband of Saraswati. He studied in a local school, and after that he just became a part of the household. At this time, sometime in 1911, 1912, 1913, the aristocratic women of Madras city decided that they needed to form a club. And they formed a club along with the English women of the city. I don't know how many of you have heard of a road called Madley's Road and Madley's Subway in T Nagar, Mambalam area. Madley was the man who laid the water works to the city. If today we are getting water in some parts of the city, it's because of what J.W. Madley did. The Keelpok Water Works was all his creation, and his wife, Mrs. Madley, was the one who really started what was called the Ladies Recreation Club, and later it came to be known as the Egmore Ladies Recreation Club. So 2 days of the week between 4 and 6, the ladies, high society ladies of Madras and their English counterparts would meet up for 2 hours of entertainment. They learned how to play tennis wearing 9-yard saris, and some of them became experts at tennis, and some became champions in table tennis. Long before table tennis made its official appearance in Madras in the 1930s, there were 2 sisters, Bapuka and Balaka, who both used to play table tennis wearing 9 yards, and they were the daughters of Justice Sadasiva Rao, Sir T. Sadasiva Iyer, and each lived up to the age of 100. And at the age of 95, Bapuka decided that she had to go and see Machu Picchu. And so Balaka went along with her at the age of 92, and both of them went all the way. They climbed up and came down. So this was the spirit of the women who were products of that Egmore Ladies Recreation Club. Buchi Babu's wife was also a member, and she would sometimes take her daughter and the daughter's companion Saraswati along with her to the club. When Saraswati would go there, she would just be a hanger-on, but she would be treated with great kindness by all the women. And they then discovered that the girl could sing. So every time she went, she would be asked to sing. And she sang, and you know, over a period of time, she exhausted everything that she had known, all the songs that she had learned, she had sung. And she went and told her guru, Pandit Krishnachar one day that, you know, I am now beginning to repeat myself. She was still very young, so she said, I am beginning to repeat myself. I don't know what I am going to say next when they call me. So he said, I am going to tell you a story this time, a story which you can recite with music and which you can entertain the audience for a good half an hour or 45 minutes by some Puranic story, you know, something about Rama, Krishna, and so on. So she learned this story, and then she goes to the Egmore Ladies Recreation Club. And by the time the members have realized that something special is going to happen that day, so some of the husbands have also come, and one among them is Justice Sir C. Shankaran Nair, who was a judge of the High Court of Madras, and the performance is a tremendous success. The girl stood up for 45 minutes and gives a wonderful performance at the age of 12 or 13, and everybody applauds, and Sir C. Shankaran Nair at the end of this program makes a speech. And he says that people like Sarojini Naidu have already begun to fight for the country's freedom, and we have heard of performers all over the world, many women performers, and it is high time that young Saraswati should make a career for herself in the world of the performing arts. Now the family then comes home, and then there is an intense discussion. Today's world, you would wonder, what is the reason for an intense discussion? If the girl is talented and then if she can perform, she should naturally be allowed to perform. So what is wrong with it? But you must remember that we are looking at the 1910s at this point of time, when the only women who could get onto stage to perform any kind were Devadasis. They were the courtesans. A very, very respected profession at one time, custodians of the art in every way, at a time when no other community allowed its women to be educated, the Devadasis were very different. They were the only community where they traced their descent from mother to daughter. The father had no importance whatsoever in the family. Property came from mother to daughter. They were the only women in the country who were educated, who could speak multiple languages, who knew the social graces, who could entertain. They were very, very respected. But the problem was that it all depended on society reciprocating the talents that they had. As society degenerated, the women themselves had to depend upon various methods of earning income to keep their family going. And you know what that becomes at the end of the day. So, and by this time you had the Western system of education coming in and the Western system of justice coming in. The British judges had no equivalent expression in their lexicon for a free woman who could take a partner at will, leave the partner at will, who had independent rights to property and who could choose the way she chose to live. For them, the only word that existed was prostitute. And they used that ad nauseum in their judgments repeatedly. And finally, when Indians became educated in the Western style, they also began to ape that knowledge that they had received, and they also began branding the women the same way. And by the time that Saraswati was performing, the Devadasi system itself was under great attack by the so-called social reformers, who only looked at it from one direction. They looked at it only from the fact that there was prostitution, there was some amount of prostitution among the Devadasis, therefore Devadasis are all evil. They did not look at it from the fact that there was members, male members from their own society who were equally responsible for what was happening. It became a situation where the Devadasis were evil and everything that they took to was evil, while everybody else was a paragon of virtue. It's very easy to form such an opinion. Therefore, women who came from communities outside of the Devadasi system, they were not allowed to perform at any place whatsoever, including their houses. So, if a woman was talented in music or dance, she had to suppress it. Because if you perform dance or music at home, immediately some elder would come along and say, what is this? Our house has become a Devadasi household. Since when have women begun to sing and dance over here? But what will happen to the reputation of our family? So, women had to suppress all their talents and keep it completely hidden. D.K. Patamal, the great singer, speaks about her mother, Rajamal, who one day during a family puja lit a lamp and began to sing. And the father-in-law immediately came out and said, what has happened to our family honor? Have we sold all our women? Stop this kind of nonsense immediately. And that was it. The mother never sang again for the rest of her life. Can you imagine? So much of talent must have just been wasted away. So the news of Saraswati having given a public performance, this girl is only 11 or 12, broke out in Madras society, and immediately there was all kinds of calumny and slander that was spoken of about her. A letter was sent, an anonymous letter was sent to the Madras Christian College saying that the guru was having an affair with the child and that he should be dismissed immediately from service. Fortunately, the college did not consider that worthy of any action to be taken, and they just avoided it. But a bigger problem was going to be posed, because you can be a Carnatic musician, in which case you sit and sing. And then you can be a dancer, in which case you perform. At that time, the dancers were all Devadasis. The Carnatic musicians were either males of all communities or women of the Devadasi caste. Now, Saraswati Bai was going to tell stories accompanied by music, and that was a performance style that came in between dance and music. It was known as Katha Kalakshepam or Harikatha. Harikatha is where you take up a theme, you work a story around it. For instance, Debbie's creation of Dakshinachitra would be a Harikatha by itself in those days. That is a typical story of one person's struggle against all odds to create an institution. That kind of thing would be a perfect theme for a Harikatha, only you would embellish it. God would come at the correct time. One day Debbie was heartbroken, did not know what to do. She prayed, and then there was a flash of lightning. Bhagavan odane vandar. Vandu kavalai padade. அடுத்த வாரம் இந்த மரத்தடியில் ஒரு புதையல் இருக்கும், அங்கே போய் பார் என்று கூறினார். And then there would be a song to illustrate the ecstasy that she felt at the vision. And this was the entertainment. And neither dance at that time was performed only in the houses of the rich or it was in the temples. And classical music was performed in temples, it was performed in public, but the greatest attraction was Harikatha. When you had 50 or 100 people attending a Carnatic music performance in those days, and you had around 10 or 20 people attending a dance performance, a Harikatha performance drew 400 or 500 people. It was a very demanding profession because performances began only at 11 or 10:30 at night, and they would go on till 3 or 4 in the morning. The reason is, the people, it was patronized most by the common people, and they couldn't afford to take time off from their trades or their profession or from farming or whatever it was. After all that was over, they would come to the temple for listening to the Harikatha performance. And in gas lights and in complete silence, the performance would happen. It had so developed, this profession, that at a time when a Carnatic musician was receiving 25 or 50 rupees for a performance, a Harikatha artist would receive 150 rupees. This was big money in 1910, 1911 and so on. But only Brahmin men performed Harikatha. Nobody else could perform. There was an unwritten law that if you had to be a Harikatha artist, you called yourself a Bhagavatar. That is, you sang of Bhagavan, and therefore you become a Bhagavatar, and only male Brahmins could perform. It was considered taboo for any other community. Very clearly, they did not have the knowledge. They did not have knowledge of multiple languages. They couldn't speak Sanskrit. They couldn't quote from Telugu. They couldn't quote from Malayalam or Kannada, or even Marathi, which had lot of Marathi songs used to be in Harikatha. So that was completely removed, and women were considered unclean, so they could not perform Harikatha. This was how the system had been. One woman, a Devadasi, had tried to take to it. Her name was Ilayanar Velur Sharadambal. She had tried her bit, it didn't succeed, and then she had given up and gone back to performance of dance. But when Saraswati took to the profession, the male artists became very insecure, and they organized a boycott of her performances. Not only did they organize a public boycott, they also said that the family will be ostracized because it is doing something which is not as prescribed by the tenets of Hinduism. You're going against the caste structure, you're going against established social practices. This family will be completely ostracized. Lastly, Harikatha is not a solo performance. You need a mridagam accompanist, you need a harmonist, you need somebody to strum the tambura. They caught hold of all those artists and told them that if you accompany this girl in future, you will never be able to accompany any of us. You don't know what her career is going to be. Tomorrow she'll perform, day after she'll stop performing. What happens to all of you? Where will you go? You have families to support. And therefore, artists decided not to perform along with Saraswati. So she was completely alone, and she was just 13. Even the Buchi Babu family finally was forced to take a stance against what Saraswati was doing. And so even the patronage that was coming was going to stop. And Father Ramarao completely broke down one day and said that this is the end of it. I don't think we should be encouraging our daughter to take to Harikatha. And I will leave for Kashi. I intend to become a sannyasi because I cannot put up with this kind of pressure. At that crucial moment, the mother Rangamal said that everybody can leave. I will keep my daughter here, and I will encourage her in the profession that she has chosen for her life. It doesn't matter if we are brought to the streets, but we are not going to give up on this. And therefore, thereafter, a performance is organized in Mylapore near the Mundakanyamman temple. And that day, the police has to be called in order to maintain law and order, to prevent people from rioting. It's exactly like what happens today. A stand-up comedian stands up to perform, and what do we find? We find that there are people, organized gangs which come to attack the performance. There is pressure brought about from a wider circle. Finally, that performance is abandoned. And that's exactly what happened. This performance had to be given up because, it could not be held because of the atmosphere in Mylapore. Finally, 1 year later, after 1 year of waiting, there is a performance that is organized in Mint Street in Georgetown. By that time, people have begun to realize that there is nothing wrong with this girl coming and giving a performance, and she performs for an hour and a half. It's a riot, and the public voluntarily pay money for the performance. I told you that 150 rupees was what a Harikatha artist would get. She was paid 450 rupees that night for her performance. And then the press took notice. The Guru, of course, had remained like a rock by her side all along, and then her career really takes off. The next month, she embarks on a South Indian tour, and she goes from town to town performing Harikatha, and everybody, initially they all come because they are curious to know how is it to witness a girl performing. Then they are so mesmerized by her voice that they listen and they become her fans. I'll try and see if this works. I'll just play it for you. You just listen to a snatch of her voice and we'll go on with the rest of the story. And then, she is invited to various parts of India. When she goes to Pune, she is given the title Gayanapadu by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, because Harikatha as an art has a lot of Maharashtrian influence in it, and so he was able to attend to it. And then Pandit Vishnu Digambar Paluskar gives her the title of Kirtanapatu, that is expert in singing songs. That is how these two titles translate, and therefore thereafter she becomes Gayanapatu, Kirtanapatu, C. Saraswati Bai. That is how she is referred to wherever she goes. The gramophone industry takes note of her, and it is said that A.V. Meyyappan, when he started Saraswati Stores, he named it after her because, he felt that she was such a popular artist. But you must remember that a woman's life in the performing arts is never very easy, and then it was even more difficult than what it is today. First of all, she becomes the earning member of the whole family thereafter, because she is earning such huge amounts that the rest of the family becomes more or less dependent on her. Her brothers and all take to jobs and things like that, but they are not as successful as she is. The entire well-being of the whole family is dependent on what Saraswati is bringing in. And, gradually from rented accommodation in Triplicane's Big Street, the family moves on. It buys 3 contiguous houses in Big Street, and number 150, 151, 152, all 3 houses become her personal property, and the family is living in it. Everybody is dependent on Saraswati's income. But Saraswati herself does not have much freedom in anything that she chooses to do. For instance, the family is so orthodox that they don't even have a telephone line. There is not even a telegraphic address for the family, so every time musical or performance engagements have to be made, a postcard has to come, and then they will reply using another postcard. So you can imagine the number of delays that would happen each time communication would go, communication would come back. The other thing is that, given the orthodoxy of that time, menstrual periods, that was a very important issue. You couldn't perform for 5 days of the month. The whole world practically knew when you were menstruating because you refused performances at that point of time. Can you imagine this kind of a situation? Public information. So, and then why? So that becomes the next question. Thirdly, wherever they went, many of the hosts' wives would be reluctant to, sometimes I think women are the greatest enemies of women. So the hosts' wives would be reluctant to host Saraswati Bai because she is coming with an all-male ensemble. The harmonist was a male, the violinist was a male, the tambura artist was a male, the guru was a male, and she was the sole woman. This was the, the kind of image that she had in public. A powerful husband would have made a big difference in one of 2 ways. He would have either been an absolute tyrant who would have dominated over her, or he would have been an extremely supportive individual who would have encouraged her in her career. But this husband was a completely colorless body. He just chose to remain at home, very intrusive, non-interfering, but completely uncontributing as far as her career was concerned. So wherever she went, she would have to go with the guru. And that created further problems, because that was the guru-shishya relationship was something that nobody ever understood. So these were all problems that she surmounted. And then in the 1930s, when she went by ship to perform in Rangoon, she was invited in Burma to perform a coast-to-coast performance for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, practically a performance every night, and again an all-male ensemble accompanying her. And the magazines wrote, Kalai Kappal Erigirathu, which means art has been auctioned off. Basically, outwardly it just says art has gone on board a ship. But when you say Kappal Erigirathu, you actually mean that it's been auctioned off. So that was the kind of public response, that while there was adulation on one side, there were severe problems on the other that she needed to overcome. Now this was not all. Imagine a career where you are standing up most nights and performing for 4 hours, 4.5 hours, and it's a solo performance. You're speaking, you're singing, you're keeping the audience entertained by telling them stories. Can you imagine the amount of physical energy that is required? And she had to be so orthodox that the cook would accompany her wherever she went. And think of the railway journeys of that era. So you belong to a very orthodox family, you don't eat till you have bathed and offered your prayers. You don't bathe in a railway train. So when you leave from here in the evening, assume that the destination is next day in the afternoon. Not a sip of water will be taken till they reach their destination, till they go to the place where they are staying, till she has had a bath, till the cook has prepared a meal, then she'll have her meal. So this was you didn't have the kind of sustenance that you required in order to do a performance for 4.5 hours. Therefore, there were no children. And she herself has said that for the entire active part of her life, she was away. Most evenings she was performing. Where was the question of spending time with the husband? And then there was the stress of performance itself, because you know what a live performance is. Several of you are artists over here. Just standing on stage is by itself something that takes a lot of energy and which requires a lot of sustenance from within. So she had psychosomatic problems as well. Very early she had fibroids in her uterus, and a very prominent doctor of Madras had to come and treat her for it. So she went through her own stresses and strains, and very early in life she becomes a diabetic. But such is the family requirements and such was her love for performing. She herself says that, I became a transformed being the moment I got onto stage. At home I was a submissive person, I listened to everything that the elders said, but on stage I was like a queen. So I think that was her release, that for 4.5 hours she could be herself, she could perform with all the energy that she could summon, and she could entertain, she could get adulation from people, and then she could go back. Now this is a photograph that was taken in the 1930s, by which time she'd become a very big celebrity in the field of the South Indian arts. No book on performing arts at that time was written without 1.5 pages on her. Always talking about the fact that she was the first woman outside the Devadasi community to take to performing, to come on to stage. And she wrote her name as C. Saraswati Bai because she came from the Madhwa community. Her father-in-law was Chakrapani Rao, so she took her father-in-law's initial, and that's how C. Saraswati Bai. All women who came to perform after her began to follow her footsteps. M.S. Subbalakshmi, who came from a Devadasi community, but took to dressing exactly like the way Saraswati Bai has dressed over here. A long sash with all the medals that she has won at various concerts, or that she's been gifted at various concerts. In fact, Subbalakshmi sings the songs that Saraswati Bai makes successes in gramophone, and Subbalakshmi also sings them and begins to emulate her. The other thing is, other women now begin to take to giving Harikatha performances. So you have Banni Bai, Padmasini Bai, Sumati Bai, Kamakoti Bai. What is common? All of them use the Bai suffix because they have seen Saraswati Bai using it. So without doubt they feel that they are safe by just copying what she has done, and so she begins to set a great trend. Now after she becomes a success in Harikatha, Bengaluru Nagaratnamma, who was a great Devadasi herself and who is a life that needs to be commemorated and remembered at all time, Nagaratnamma takes to giving Harikathas herself. And then Nagaratnamma decides that it is fine for women from outside the Devadasi community to also come and give Carnatic music performances. So there is at that time in Triplicane a very close friend of Saraswati Bai, and her name is Vaimu Kodainayaki Ammal, who we today recognize as the first Indian woman publisher in the whole country. She ran a magazine called Jagan Mohini. And she was only 12 or 13 at that time. Nagaratnamma hears her sing and says, "You must come and perform on stage and you must give a concert." Now Kodai Nayaki's family, her in-laws, were hugely encouraging of her and her husband also. So they don't have any problems, but they are afraid of whether they'll get the same kind of reaction that Saraswati faced when she took to performing. So Nagaratnamma says, "I will sit behind your daughter and strum the tambura and let me see which man comes and objects." So you didn't trifle with Bengaluru Nagaratnamma under any circumstance. So when Nagaratnamma sat behind Vaimu Kodainayaki and Kodainayaki performed, women began to take to Carnatic music careers. Women from outside the Devadasi community began to take to Carnatic music careers. And then in 1931 in Kanchipuram, a young girl sings in her school, and next day in the morning the Swadeshamitran prints a photograph of that girl in their paper, and they say this girl has won a prize in her school in Kanchipuram for having sung a song in a play. The whole family weeps as though there has been a death in the family, because in those days, if your daughter's photo appeared in the press, there was nothing worse than that. Whereas today, only if your children's photo appears in the press is there anything in your life. You'd do anything for your child's photo to appear in the papers. And the father says, "I've got 7 sisters to get married off. You've brought shame on the whole family by getting yourself photographed." And to add insult to injury, a gramophone recording engineer comes next day in the morning and says, "We would like your daughter to come and sing for our gramophone company." So the father shuts the door firmly on his face and says, "Don't come here anymore." Vaimu Kodainayaki comes to know about it, makes 8 journeys to Kanchipuram to convince the family. In the 9th journey, she brings that girl back. That girl performs in the same Egmore Ladies Recreation Club where Saraswati had performed. And that girl is D.K. Patamal. If Saraswati had not given that performance in 1911, where would Patamal's career have been? Just look at the threads that connect one to the other, to the other, to the other, and finally this. At this time, I'm just coming to the end of the few more slides. The Music Academy is founded in 1928. Saraswati becomes one of the early women experts committee members of the Music Academy. The male Harikatha artists have never liked her, and even now they are trying their level best to elbow her out of the experts committee, but she is there and she is invited to perform frequently. The theatre community loves Saraswati. When Kannaiah stages Nandanar Charitram, he invites Saraswati to come to the troupe and perform exclusively for the troupe, and she does the Harikatha and goes away, and after she leaves, and Kannaiah gives her 1,000 rupees and a gold cup as a gift, and after she leaves he tells his drama troupe, "You know, we are 100 of us and we performed this play. That one woman performed it in 4 hours. 1 minute she was the Brahmin Vediyar, next minute she was Nandanar, then she was Lord Shiva, then she was the disciple. You never felt that there was an absence of a whole theatrical community acting. One woman was able to do it. Just look at her talent." Many years later, when S.S. Vasan would make Nandanar Charitram, Bhakta Nandanar in Gemini Studios, he invited Saraswati to come and do the Harikatha there so that his studio staffers would know what one woman can do by way of a performance. So the Music Academy, you know, she's there and she performs regularly for it. She's performing for other sabhas. In 1938, when she completes 30 years of performing, or 35 years of performing, she was born in 1892. By 1938, she has completed 30 or 35 years of performing. So you can imagine when she really started. There is a public meeting and her portrait is unveiled. She writes an article about the story of her life. But by the early 1940s, her energies have begun to flag, and by 45, she decides that she needs to retire. She had no children. She adopted her brother's eldest son as her child. She brought him up, conducted his marriage with great pomp and ceremony in the 1940s in Madras, only to have that man die of typhoid the next year, leaving a young widow. And that was such a shock to her that she just gives up performing thereafter. and performs very sporadically once or twice here and there, but after that her career kind of ceases and she goes into retirement. In the the Music Academy has an award called the Sangeeta Kalanidhi. You may have all heard of that. That is considered to be the Lifetime Achievement Award for any classical performing artist. If you don't get Sangeeta Kalanidhi, you don't get moksha. Basically, that is it. And generally, it is awarded at so late a stage in life that you get moksha immediately. So that was now, we've kind of tried to make changes in it, but we've not been entirely successful. Till the 1960s, only males used to get it. And in the 1950s, there was a strong move that Saraswati should get the award. But there was a team of experts committee members and secretaries who said nothing doing, a woman can never be allowed to get it. They wanted to make sure that there is a valid excuse for not giving it to her, and they invited her to come and perform Kalpana Swaras. When you sing extempore Swaras. And she didn't know that because she's a Harikatha artist. In Harikatha, you don't sing Kalpana Swaras. And they had themselves awarded the Sangeeta Kalanidhi to earlier Harikatha male artists who didn't sing Kalpana Swaras. But they used that as an excuse and they prevented her from getting it, but they couldn't not recognize her. So they gave her what was called a certificate of merit, which was when a new award was introduced in the Music Academy, which continues even today. But the fact is that she was denied the Sangeeta Kalanidhi. The Vaimu Kodainayaki, I told you about that woman who sang first, and the publisher, she was so upset that Saraswati didn't get the Sangeeta Kalanidhi that she organized a public meeting in Triplicane and gave her the title Harikatha Kalanidhi on that day, saying that to hell with the Academy, if it doesn't give you that award, you have this award. Saraswati was a Vaimu Kodainayaki. They were all great followers of Mahatma Gandhi. The family told her that you will get arrested if you say anything about Gandhi in your Harikathas. So Saraswati had her own way of dealing with it. She would come to a certain point in the story. Some story it will be something on Vibhishana, something it will be on Rama, something on Rakshasas, on Krishna and all that. She'll say, and then just like everybody fell at the feet of the Lord, all of us will now fall at the feet of Mahatma Gandhi. And then she will sing a song in English. This is the occasion for our liberation. This Congress resolution, Gandhi's inspiration, this is the occasion for our liberation. She will sing this song and everybody would applaud. Apropos of nothing, in the middle of the performance, sometimes twice or thrice in the middle of the same performance, she would sing the song for Gandhi. That was her way of whipping up nationalist sentiment. Now independence comes, the Guru passes away, she's leading her life in retirement. When the Maharani of Travancore, Saraswati Bai, realizes that Saraswati has turned 60, and she says there was no public event for celebrating this great woman, so she calls C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, who used to be the Diwan of Travancore earlier, and she says that I want you people to organize a public function to commemorate Saraswati completing 60 years. So in 1960, there is a public event, and as is very common in Saraswati's life, everybody on stage is a male except herself, and M.S. Subbulakshmi comes and sings the prayer on this particular day because she always held Saraswati Bai in the greatest of respect. In 1968, the Music Academy decides to confer the Sangeeta Kalanidhi on M.S. Subbulakshmi. Finally, they have realized that women are deserving of the award after all. And the Academy has a very peculiar tradition that when an artist becomes a Kalanidhi, a more senior artist has to propose the name of that particular artist. Now, Subbulakshmi is a woman. It will be nice if there is another woman to propose her name, right? So they very shamelessly go to Saraswati Bai and they say, we would like you to come and propose the name of M.S. Subbulakshmi for this. And such is the grace of Saraswati Bai that she says, fine, I'll be there on that particular day. She comes, she proposes the name of Subbulakshmi for the Kalanidhi. Her speech on that occasion is fully recorded and is available at the Music Academy archives, where she says, I consider Subbulakshmi to be one of the greatest artists that humankind has. Complete grace. No bitterness about the fact that the award had been denied her and any other lesser person would have used that opportunity to vent their venom on the Academy and things like that, but no. She just blesses Subbulakshmi, ensures that she gets the award. Thereafter, she never comes back to the Music Academy again. That's her last appearance over there. The American writer Milton Singer comes to Madras and he interviews her at this time. He writes a beautiful book on Indian cultural traditions called When a Great Civilization Metamorphoses. That's the name of the book. And there he's interviewed her, and he says that, you once sang about bhakti, you sang about great religious aspects, but now India is changing. The demands of India are very different. What do you think? What is the relevance of your profession today? And she says, why can there not be harikathas on toilets, on wells, on the importance of hygiene? A theme can be developed into a story no matter what happens. And she says, if I had the energy, if I had the opportunity, I would do a harikatha on those topics also. And then he talks to her and he says, how often did you travel? She says, no, I have not spared a single village of South India, and not a single village of South India has spared me. And I have traveled all over the country as well. I have performed before Maharajas, Viceroys, so many other things. Very interesting life. This is a photo of her with her guru. He, lived up to the 1940s, and he really was her father figure in every way. And when he passed away, she ensures that his 10-day, obsequies are all performed at her expense. This is a photograph of her with her husband on her 60th birthday. And then, she's become a very old woman. And in the late 60s, this photograph was taken. And then comes the Sangeet Natak Academy Award by the central government. President Radhakrishnan was a great fan of her performing style. And here he is giving her the award. And here she is with our Birju Maharaj seated next to her, getting the award together on the same day. Her last performance was in 1968, by which time, she had become very old. Eventually, in 1974, she passes away. Hardly anybody knew of her because she had stopped performing 34 years earlier. But the Hindu gave her a huge obituary because they knew. The Hindu had published reviews of her performances right from the time that she had started performing, and they write about how she was the pioneer, the woman who really made it possible for people to get rid of the shackles of shame. There was nothing wrong in performing in public. That's a profession to take to. And she was the one who showed them the way. This is my favorite photograph. It's almost as though she is showing men her finger and saying that don't, play with us. We can teach you a lesson. So that then was the life of C. Saraswati Bai. Thank you so much. So that is her voice. I've been writing a book on her life now for more than 10 years and I haven't completed it. I have to do it soon before I become very old myself.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Privilege for me.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for opening our festival on board.